hope that in some way my vote can affect the future.
Or do we? Does our vote even really matter? Because elected officials have come and they have gone. Surely as water will wet.
Hey, kids, tell everybody it's your duty to vote.
I hope every American will turn out and vote.
It's the votes that count. You need an absentee ballot. It gives you the power to vote.
You're 18. Take the spoon out of your nose, take the needle out of your arm, take the beer out of your mouth, and go vote.
Get up and
Vote. 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 Vote.
What are you doing? You're just sitting there.
Ever since I was a kid, I always heard,
Remember, boys and girls, it's their duty to vote.
you've got to get out the vote. Your vote is important.
Important.
When the light is gone.
You have the power.
Show the world how strongly we believe in freedom, how strongly we believe in our country,
I have fallen victim.
how strongly we believe in democracy.
What you have chosen, what you have made of me.
Your voice matters. Our men and women, they fought overseas for your right to vote, so don't waste it. Look, Iraq's free now because of us, because they can now vote. That one nation is in shambles. Because nobody has the right to vote.
I will stand tall.
Vote for a farm. Vote for rejuvenation. Vote for normalcy. Vote for future. Vote a leader. Vote for mourning. Vote for a gentler nation. For people first. Ross for boss. Vote for country first. Vote for change. Change. Change.
At this defining moment, change has come to America.
Has anything changed?
I still wonder then, suppress despair. I will stand tall.
Since we were little kids, we learn America is special, and it is. We do hold the power here, not some dictator or tyrannical murderer. We have the say.
It's a privilege to select the man I want in each office. Hope that in some way my vote can affect the future.
Or do we? Does our vote even really matter? Because elected officials have come and they have gone. Surely as water will wet us and fire will burn, no matter who's elected. Look, global unrest, chaos, terror, and slaughter always return. Our founders never intended for this to be the way our country is run. But the radicals and the progressives slowly began chipping away at that firewall. Bit by bit, they went underground into the bowels of the chasmic bureaucracy that they helped create. I don't know if we'd ever really realize how real this deep state was if it wasn't for Ukraine. We've uncovered the people, the organizations, the government programs that has been built to operate completely outside of official channels and hidden from you. It's beyond them not caring what you want. They don't care what the person you voted for even wants. And this country, this world, it has to stay on fire for them to see it through. The world is being molded into their ideological fantasy. When the president shined a light on Ukraine, it uncovered one of the shadow government's biggest success stories. But here's the problem. The shadow government overstepped. And through the impeachment inquiry, they're slowly being unmasked one by one. The shadow government is attempting to seize your destiny.
I have fallen victim to what you have chosen, what you have made of me.
So, no. Right now, does it matter who you vote for? 2016 could have ended up with Trump, or Ted Cruz, or Jeb Bush. But the deep state controls all of them. This shadow government is taking away from you and this nation everything that makes it great. Our freedom, our vote, transparency, real and lasting change. President Trump, wittingly or unwittingly, started this process. But believe me, it will be up to us now to expose them and take control of our own destiny.
Hello, America. Well, it started today. The impeachment circus, wall-to-wall noise and narrative. I watched some of it today. My head was about to explode because I know what you're about to know. How do you cut through all of this crap? Adam Schiff today, at the end of his opening statement to begin the public impeachment inquiry, said this.
Benjamin Franklin was asked what kind of a country America was to become. A republic, he answered, if you can keep it.
Okay.
The fundamental issue raised by the impeachment inquiry into Donald J. Trump is, can we keep it?
Okay, got it. Adam Schiff thinks President Trump is threatening the existence of the republic. But how about a few John Adams quotes thrown in there as well? Because they seem even more relevant. Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Also, liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. And facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. You're not going to see a lot of fact or evidence from the impeachment trial, but tonight you're going to get a lot of it. The case that the Democrats are making against President Trump is straightforward and very simple for the simple-minded. It's made for a society made up of people that they think you are, simpletons. It's all about the phone call on July 25th, and President Trump just had a bad man he really wanted to beat in the polls, and so that's all this is about. They say there was clearly quid pro quo, that Trump used foreign aid as bait to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. They're going to say that this was bribery. Case closed. Unless you want to look for pesky little facts. Their case doesn't require any homework. It's made for simpletons. They dismiss any other related issues as debunked conspiracy theories, but they have not been debunked, and they are not conspiracy theories. They have put a firm boundary around one simple aspect of this case. That phone call, that's it. That's all you're allowed to see. You cannot go opening any other doors or talk to any people that might confirm anything but the guilty verdict that they have already determined in secret. But facts and evidence are stubborn things, as John Adams said. They require an investigation and honesty, regardless of our personal wishes, inclinations, or passions. This is the most complex story I have ever presented to you. And I said that about, 2 months ago when I did the mega chalkboard. I'm going to ask a lot more of you than the Democrats will ever ask of you. I am going to ask you, as an American, something that no media will ever ask for you, because they don't think you can handle it. But let me echo Schiff's quoting of Ben Franklin. To keep a republic requires exactly what I'm asking you to do tonight. The hard work of understanding history and context and of asking difficult questions. There's not going to be any Adam Schiff spoon feeding here. You're going to have to think tonight. You're going to have to listen, perhaps learn, and then read after. But isn't that who we aspire to be? We are going to do something that has not been done by us ever before, and that is, as I get into the facts, I am going to live tweet. We are going to serve out on social media every single document that proves the point we're going to make tonight. But that's what it's going to take to be a nation of people who think and work through tough issues, who don't just follow the literal mob. That's a nation that pursues the whole truth. And tonight is exactly how we keep a republic. But we have to start with history.
Beck, Democrats Hydra.
In the last special, I took you through multiple things that the left and the mainstream media intentionally leave out when they talk about Trump and Ukraine. I showed you how the media would just intentionally leave things out and mislead you. The whistleblower had to be heard. Well, we want to hear the whistleblower, but now the whistleblower can't be heard. Over the last couple of months, have you wondered why Ukraine, of all places, has dominated the news? Who knew that the U.S. was so closely involved? And now, here we are, dealing with these people we've never even heard of, having to learn all kinds of new names, new places. And is it worth it? Is this a puppet show? Did the president do something? What is the truth? Tonight, I want to teach you the difference between conspiracy fact and conspiracy theory. There is a difference. One is, I bet you, and the other is, no, we have facts. To show you that what I'm going to present tonight is not a theory, it's a fact, you can just go back into the past century and you can see how this has played out over and over and over again. In the last century, you'll see the growing government reach of the U.S. government, whether it's Woodrow Wilson, I hate this guy, and his work in redesigning the international borders after World War I. Here he is with his 14 points speech. Or maybe it's FDR deciding all kinds of things for the people because he knows best, including he's the guy who brought us into bed with the Saudis. We had to be friends with the Saudis. How much have we paid for that relationship? Was that a mistake or was that right? But if you look, example after example, Iraq. This is the Bay of Pigs. This was because of our fooling around and trying to nation build in Iran. This is the Benghazi attack. I mean, it's over and over and over again. We never seem to learn our lesson. Every time we meddle outside of our borders, it's the same thing, and it bites us squarely in the ass. And both parties say they're done with it. I mean, I think this is what this election was all about. This guy, people were saying, you know what, I don't want to be the world's policeman anymore. This guy said, I'm going to get us out. But did he? People who say,
I don't want to meddle in other people's business. Those cries just seem to bounce off thick walls of Americans' monolithic deep state. Oh, and there is one. And if you thought hope and change was going to alter this, no, it's not going to. The U.S. meddling in other countries, if you think that's over, I'm going to show you some things tonight in their own words, with their own documents, that will beg to differ. But you really have to ask yourself, is this what you want? Should we be fomenting revolution around the world? Should we be starting revolutions in foreign lands, influencing the elections, and then partnering with NGOs to create this shadow government? Partner with these NGOs that don't have anything to do with you, that will met out justice, and then also pick the candidates for the countries. Did we pick these guys, or did the people of Ukraine pick these guys? That, I guess, is what we have to decide, isn't it? All of this is being done in your name. It's being done with your money. And I don't think most people even know it, let alone are okay with it. I want to introduce you to this man. This man is Alec Ross. Now, he's from the State Department. He's the Senior Advisor for Innovation. And here he is talking about something new, the State Department's strategy in 2012.
And to date, we've trained more than 800 civil society organizations from 50 countries around the world. This is just an unnuanced success that Secretary Clinton helped bring to the State Department.
Wow, after the Bay of Pigs and Benghazi, finally success. Now, this clip is not going to make much sense to you right now, but we will lay out all of the facts for you here in a second. Just wait. I'm asking you to stick through this special tonight, because to truly understand the complexity surrounding the current impeachment effort, to know why you must talk to the whistleblower, you must. It's going to require some patience and doing homework beyond the approved tidbits that the media tries to spoon feed you every day. They think you're a dope. They think that people can't sit through complicated things. Maybe they're right. I've never felt that way. So what is it that people are really afraid of when it comes to Ukraine and Donald Trump? Yes, they're afraid of losing an election. They could honestly be afraid, hey, is he colluding with those people to throw an election? But it's so much more complicated than just 2020. That's why we actually need the Senate to pick this impeachment inquiry up. Yes, it's going to pass in the House and it's going to have nothing. It's a show trial. But we have to reveal what's really going on with our State Department and what they're doing overseas, to air our dirtiest laundry and maybe, just maybe, claw our way back to some legitimacy in the world. But we need context and we need background. You know, the things that the mainstream media never provides. That's why we're bringing you these specials. That's why I'm asking you to join us in this quest by subscribing to the Blaze TV. We cannot do this without your help. We've made this special free so everyone can watch it, but we ask you to please become a member. Help us pay for this research. All right, if you've ever played chess or checkers, you know checkers is just about making the next move into jump. But you know chess, that requires strategy. If you play chess like checkers, you're going to lose. Presidential elections are all about focusing on that next move. But if you really want to accomplish something real, systematic change, well, that requires strategy. Now, you may have heard me in the past, a couple thousand times, talk about a group called the Fabian Society. It was created when London looked like this in 1884. And it took its name from a Roman general named Fabius. His Latin nickname means delayer. Well, that doesn't sound very good. Delayer? I don't want to be... Well, he was fighting Hannibal. Remember the one with the elephants? This powerful army came across the mountains, and Fabius avoided major head-on battles. Instead, he used smaller strategic skirmishes, and his patience led to attrition and wore down Hannibal. This is the Fabian Society. This is one of their booklets from around the turn of the century after they first started. Socialism and intellectuals. All intellectuals love Fabian socialism. In their very first pamphlet, they declared, "For the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently when warring against Hannibal. Though many censured his delays, but when the time comes, you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless." Has anybody thought the socialists are starting to hit hard? One of the Fabian society, socialist society's symbols is this. It's a tortoise, and you know the story of the tortoise and the hare. It represents their overall strategy in converting a government to socialism incrementally over time, rather than just trying to do it through a violent revolution. The motto that always went with the Fabian tortoise said, "When I strike hard." The Fabian Society, their coat of arms is this. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing, which represented the Fabian Society's method. I mean, gotta hand it to them. At least they're being honest about their deception, I guess. We've talked about this several times. This is the Fabian Socialist window. It's a stained glass window, the Fabian window designed by an early Fabian member that everybody loves. Oh my gosh, George Bernard Shaw. He's a playwright. He's a genius. He's won all kinds of awards. We should celebrate him and do all of his plays. The guy was a monster. This is one of his first books, Intelligent Women's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism by George Bernard Shaw. He was a Fabian socialist. He is also the guy who came up with the idea of maybe we can make some kind of a chamber and fill it with gas. That's George Bernard Shaw. So in this window that he designed, he depicted the Fabian founders. He included himself in the starring role, building the new world. This is him hammering the world. See the guy with the bellows. They're heating the globe as if it's a piece of hot red steel. Then they hammer it into the shape they want. On the shield above the world, they have the wolf in sheep's clothing. The message across the top of the window says this: "Pray devoutly, hammer stoutly, and remold it nearer to the heart's desire." Well, that says it all, doesn't it? And pray devoutly, hammer stoutly. The Fabians were all about the concept of gradualism. And the crazy thing is, it's working. The Fabian Society founded Britain's Labour Party in 1900. Here's Britain's Labour Party that they started, and it's still going strong today. In 1951, the Fabians took their vision global, creating a couple of things. The Socialist International organization, still very active today. Their goal of Socialist International was to be a central coordinator for the worldwide socialist movement. It seeks to establish a world government and views the UN as the ideal way to accomplish this goal. When they had their Oslo conference, here they are originally, when they had their Oslo conference, though, in 1962, they said, "The ultimate objective of the parties of Socialist International is nothing less than world government. As a first step towards it, then we seek to strengthen the United Nations so it may become more and more effective." Even today, Socialist International is committed to a new democratic order. In their Declaration of Principles, they state, "The international challenge is nothing less than the beginning of a new democratic world society. We can't allow blocs, nations, and private corporations to shape the political structure of the planet as a mere byproduct of their own self-interest. Strengthening the United Nations is the important step in the creation of this new democratic world society." By the way, To give you some idea where the American socialists are headed, in 2017, the Democratic Socialists of America voted to withdraw from the International Socialist Union because they said these guys aren't left enough. Feels too many socialist international member parties in other countries just aren't doing enough to bring that one world government into play. Now, these are the people today, of course, that we know. But there's lots of groups. Today's Fabian Society gets significant funding from the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. FEPS is the think tank wing of the Party of European Socialists. The PES is the association that all of the members of the socialist parties in the EU nations are part of. It's all part of an umbrella political party that campaigns to get socialists elected to the European Parliament. Naturally, all these European socialist parties are also members of the Socialists International. Another vital way Fabian socialists achieve gradualism, well, create a university, especially really prestigious ones. In fact, this guy in 1894, George Bernard Shaw, and 3 other prominent Fabians decided to use the 20,000-pound gift the society gave him, and they created the London School of Economics. Today, The Guardian describes the school as political clout, as being closely wired to Parliament, Whitehall, and the Bank of England, which is precisely what the Fabians set out to do. In 2006, it was a perfect moment illustrating the slow and steady success of the Fabian Socialist project, when the original Fabian window was reinstalled in the London School of Economics. Who had their picture taken in front of it? Who spoke at the unveiling ceremony? Labour Party and Fabian Socialist Minister Tony Blair. By the way, this is the graduating class of the London School of Economics in 1954. In that, you'll find this young, handsome man. George Soros graduated in 54 with a philosophy and economics degree. I'm not exactly sure what kind of philosophy they teach there, but I could guess. All right, let's go back to America, because that's what we really care about, right? Well, as socialists developed their slow and steady approach in England, socialists were trying to gain a foothold in America as well. This guy is Walter Lippmann. He's a famous American journalist and was a member of the New York Socialist Party. In fact, here's the New York Socialist Party at the beginning. In France, near the end of World War I, he worked briefly on the staff of this guy, Edward House. Now, Edward House is really interesting because here he is with Woodrow Wilson and his really evil wife, who was actually president for a while, but that's a different story. Here he is over here with the president. Now, House was the president's closest advisor. Wilson and House's partnership was a little shady because House wasn't a member of Wilson's cabinet. He had no official position at all, and yet he lived at the White House. In 1917, House put Lippmann in charge of a secret panel. It was a presidential top-secret research group. Here they are. It's called the Inquiry, which made up pretty much almost the entirety of the Ivy League academics. And Lippmann recruited most of the advisors, and the Inquiry met in secret to design America's post-World War I plans for the world. While the Inquiry was hard at work, Wilson wrote this to House, quote, "When the war is over, we can force them," meaning the European allies, "to our way of thinking, because by that time they will, among other things, be financially in our hands." Holy cow, that sounds pretty evil. In December 1917, the inquiry sent Wilson a report which detailed how the U.S. could use money as a weapon for a diplomatic offensive to manipulate Europe when the war was finally over. In January 1918, Wilson worked in a room alone with Colonel House, and together they worked directly from the inquiry's report to type this out. This is Woodrow Wilson's famous 14 points. This could be considered the birth of the deep state. Wilson's 14 points, of course, helped create something else. This is an original letter from Woodrow Wilson talking about the League of Nations and how it is the only thing that will save the world, and Europe must follow along. The League of Nations, in particular, the 14th point, called for something like it. It was the world's first major attempt at a structure for world government. Well, Wilson took several members of the inquiry with him to France for the Paris Peace Conference. Here they are in Paris, France, and here is the Paris Peace Conference. Now, Lippmann, as part of the delegation, when the conference was over, the inquiry members returned to the U.S. and created this. Oh, here's where it gets conspiratorial. The Council on Foreign Relations. It would be an organization of American diplomats and other government officials. Here they are. Here are the government diplomats. Here's some other officials. Here's some bankers, some high-level journalists. A ton of academics were there. I mean, it was all of it. It was supposed to be nonpartisan, of course. The stated aim of the CFR would be to develop and influence government policy. So it was outside of the government. In other words, just to continue doing the work that was set out by the inquiry. The official history of the Council of Foreign Relations is even called Continuing the Inquiry. Conspiracies. All right, over time, the CFR would prove to be the perfect marriage between academia and the media to affect government policy. So now, let's fast forward 20 years. It's 1939. America's about to go to war again, mainly because of all of the things that Wilson did after World War I. But this time, FDR is president, and he's a Wilson admirer, the most socialist-leaning president in American history so far. And shortly after World War II broke out in 1939, the Rockefellers decided to fund a 5-year top-secret Council on Foreign Relations project called the War and Peace Studies. Now, at that time, the State Department was still relatively small, and with a war on the horizon for the U.S., the Council on Foreign Relations saw a golden opportunity. The CFR proposed that this top-secret research project would shape American foreign policy, just like the inquiry had done under Wilson. So over the next 5 years of the project, the War and Peace Studies Group produced 682 memos for the State Department. All of them were marked classified at the time. The State Department marked all of the documents classified. Neither party wanted it to be known that the State Department was collaborating with some outside group. All right, 2 years after the top-secret War and Peace Studies project began, the U.S. government formed another tight partnership with people from the outside. FDR wanted an organization that would campaign against isolationism that was dominant across the country at the time. And isolationism, was it isolationism as we think, or is it just like, can we stay out of everybody else's business? This was months before Pearl Harbor. So he needed help shaping public opinion in support of the war, you know, just in case. Well, his wife was helped. Eleanor Roosevelt, she was named honorary co-chair of the new organization called Freedom House. Whoa, who doesn't love that? It's like the Patriot Act, except in a house. It was funded by the U.S. government, yet somehow classified as a non-government organization. How's that possible? This is just the first instance of an NGO getting U.S. funds, your tax dollars, doing the will of the State Department without you knowing about it, and it wouldn't be the last time. The first 2 years of World War II were, let's just say, very busy for FDR and the State Department, since the League of Nations had obviously failed its primary mission, and it looks like our meddling led to another war. The State Department started working on a plan for a new world organization in 1931. FDR even sketched out the UN structure while he was meeting in Tehran. That conference happened in 1943. And the Council on Foreign Relations, those members, well, they worked on a top secret War and Peace Studies project, and they also attended the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in 1944, where the United Nations was designed. Oh, it was great. I think this is for them in 1944 here. When the UN officially began a year later, one of the leaders in designing the UN Security Council was this guy. He's a Norwegian socialist. His name is Trygve Lie. I don't know. What do I look? Scandinavian? He was also elected as the UN's first general secretary. Oh, wow. A socialist. Score another win for the Fabians' gradualism strategy. So obviously, the UN had, stuck around, and it's been here long enough to become bloated, corrupt, and ineffective, just like all big governments throughout the world's history. Big surprise, it's been very bad at preventing wars. Progressives, regardless of nationality, they don't really understand this about human nature. You can't legislate wars from happening. It also turns out that people aren't really interested in a world that is run by one world government. One size does not fit all. Individual peoples like their independence. So, the European Union. What are we going to do? How did that happen? Well, the European Union was, let's take it down a notch before we fold everybody into the UN, because nobody wants to be ruled by somebody, on the other side of the sea. So the European Union slowly formed after the end of World War II. Again, just trying to be a buffer against the extremist nationalism that wrecked their countries and their continent through two major wars. This is when Paul-Henri Spaak, he is a Belgian who was the driving force behind the formation of the European Union. He was, believe it or not, oh my gosh, here he is, as a member of the Socialist Belgian Labour Party. Sensing another trend here? Socialists and progressives love the idea of centralized controlling bodies to run everything through their hand-picked experts. And they don't like it when people try to wiggle out from under their control. Oh no, no. Just look at the Brexit chaos in England. But back in 1947, Deep State had been burrowing in for over 3 decades. It was developing its own culture and agenda. And that meant that the State Department wasn't necessarily in step with every president. For example, President Truman, he recognized the new state of Israel in 1948 against the State Department's wishes. In fact, they told him, "You're not going to do it. Harry, don't do it or we'll destroy you." Oh, that sounds familiar. The State Department preferred a United Nations trusteeship, which would create a Jewish and Arab province in Palestine, but no official states. Well, with the exception of Israel, here he is with the Israel celebration. With the exception of this, everything became about nation building in the State Department and using the UN as much as possible for international cover, and using at the time communist containment as justification at home. Americans have always been isolationists, but not in the bad way. We don't want to be the world's policemen. We've had that tendency since we came here, unless we're deliberately attacked. But for the next 70 years, our government rarely reflected the will of its own people in foreign affairs. They just kept doing it. We tried to nation build in Korea under Eisenhower. Here's Cuba and Vietnam under Kennedy. Here's that one. How about these two? I love these two. How about Vietnam and the Dominican Republic? Johnson. That was another one we were going to solve. Or here's Nixon, Vietnam, Cambodia, and here he is, nation building in Laos. Then with the president, President Reagan, Grenada, and Nicaragua. Have any of these worked out for us? I just want to ask. Then Panama under Bush. And then there was Somalia, and then Haiti, and Bosnia, and Serbia under Clinton. There we go. Here's Haiti. Ooh, here we are in Bosnia. I remember that worked out really well. Here he is in Serbia. And then we got to George W. Bush in Afghanistan. How's that working out? And then George W. Bush and Obama with Egypt. That didn't work out, did it? How come all these presidents are doing the same thing? It's not working out, ever. Ever. It's not working out. How come we're doing the same thing? Why doesn't this ever change? You don't have any new ideas? Oh, I'll show you in a minute. Oh, we have new ideas. You're going to love them. Let me take you to 1983. The U.S. government formed a new organization that would be like Freedom House, except on steroids. They called it NED. Who doesn't love NED? The National Endowment for Democracy. Again, funded by the U.S. government, and even subject to congressional oversight. Yet it still insists on calling an NGO for some reason. Don't ask me how that works. But NED acts as a grant-making foundation giving your dollars to private groups in other countries with the purpose of promoting democracy in those countries. NED's board of directors, they are great people. There's Carl Gershman as president. Now, who's Carl Gershman? Don't worry. He's just the former executive director of the Social Democrats USA. Yeah, the other main socialist part in the U.S. is Gershman. He's still the president of NED today. For the deep state to survive, longevity and tenure is key. So when they created NED, it was approved by Congress. And one of its purposes, founding purposes, was this: promoting non-governmental participation in democratic training programs and strengthening democratic electoral processes abroad in cooperation with indigenous democratic forces. Wow, that sounds like a fancy way of saying, I don't know, revolution and election interference. But it goes on. When Congress reauthorized NED a few years later, there was additional mandates. And it's this one, that NED consult with the State Department on any overseas programs it funds prior to the commencement of their activities. Wow. So if you're tracking with me, the National Endowment for Democracy, supposedly an NGO, even though it's fully funded by you, coordinates with the State Department before it starts any of its overseas activities. Perfect. Let me show you some. In 2008, our nation building was not working, especially when it came to Afghanistan and Iraq. That's when we got our first community organizer in chief, President Barack Obama. Oh my gosh. Now Barry, later known as Barack, he rose through the political ranks in the same wolf in sheep's clothing mold of the Fabians. Distract and dazzle with hope while delivering tons of change. Oh, he was all over. Overseas, we obviously needed a change of strategy because it wasn't working. Here, the panel's report assails the CIA for failure on Iraq weapons, the 7 deadly sins of failure in Iraq, and of course, we all know that picture. The CIA and military ops weren't cutting it anymore. We'd have to tailor our nation building, country by country. How are we going to do that? Well, welcome to the age of irresponsibility. Because the deep state didn't stop its efforts altogether. No. They just farmed them out. They found a better way. That way they don't have to be responsible. The military would pull back, and we'd use a private military company like Blackwater. State Department pulls out, and we'll use those NGOs. CIA pulls back, and, well, we have Google and Twitter and Facebook. They're doing all the community organizing on a global scale, and we can't control them. Or can we? You see, the tools have changed, but you still heat the world and remold it nearer to the heart's desire. One of the main architects of this 21st century strategy was in the Obama White House, and we talked about her an awful lot at the time. Her name is Samantha Power, and her doctrine was really known as the responsibility to protect. I explained it 8 years ago on Fox. Why don't you get together with my charity group? So she did. And then they spawned, you ready? The Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, which gives us the responsibility to protect doctrine, which sends us into Libya. Isn't that weird? By the way, Open Society, only one of 2 of the foundations that bankroll this whole idea. So, it was her idea that George Soros creates a foundation that gets this whole responsibility to protect thing through the very same doctrine that was used because she has his ear. I wonder who has his other ear. Uh-oh, I remember now, her husband. So the U.S. military action in Libya is based on this. And this is these are all the very diverse people that got together to say, back must fall. Hey, by the way, we should do something about democracy in Egypt. Did that work out for us? Libya? Deep state is not a conspiracy theory. This is a long tale. Okay? And they're not meeting like Spectre in some little secret society room. But it is an ingrained culture of unelected officials who have their plans set and they work to fulfill their goals, regardless who the president is. Bush, Obama, Trump, doesn't matter. That's the deep state, a vast bureaucracy built over a century on the backs and shoulders of the elite, the progressive, the academic ideology, creating a sustained culture like that slowly over time is much more effective than some short-term conspiracy that, if you could put it together, pull it off. This is the old Fabian Society methodology. The idea that it just takes time. They didn't stop after the disaster with Benghazi and Libya. No. They changed course. The overall through line here, continuing in what we're going to show you in just a minute, is this elite class of progressives, academics, socialists that are slowly heating up and molding the world. Heating it up. They're pushing for socialism by touting democracy. They are funding radical groups to overthrow governments overseas. And they are ready to swoop in to help shape new governments along the lines that's closer to their heart's desire. And it's all being done in your name with your money. Now,
You want to get to the facts? Don't listen to anybody who can't show you the original documents. Don't listen to anybody on this impeachment hearing or any of this stuff, any of it, unless they have the facts, unless they have the documents, unless they have it in their own words, unless they have them on videotape, which is what we do. And I'll show that to you next. Potty break, everybody. We're now to the point to where I can talk to you about conspiracy fact and what Ukraine and this impeachment is really all about. Tonight, in the next few minutes, I will prove that the U.S. State Department is in collusion with the intel community and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, with NGOs, and they are working to foment revolution all around the world. I will also prove to you the name of this is not Hydra. The name of it is Civil Society 2.0. I'll show you its birth. The main non-governmental partner is George Soros. The documents that you will have in your hands in the next few minutes will prove these things without a shadow of a doubt. The whistleblower and other witnesses that Democrats refuse to call are involved in Civil Society 2.0, and they are being protected by the Democrats in Congress. And the goal of civil society is to create a shadow justice system, rewrite constitutions, and pick elected leaders. They're doing all of this stuff without the people's knowledge, without your knowledge, which I contend is the biggest crime, the biggest high crime and misdemeanor. And the conspiracy to not only commit this crime of changing constitutions and fomenting revolution, but also to keep that secret is why a hearing must go to the Senate, where they can call all of these witnesses. Tonight, as we're going through this, every piece of evidence that we have, all of the documents, all of the emails, all of the videos, all of it, will be released during this program on social media in real time during this broadcast. So as I pick up a document, you will have it as well. All of this is being done in your name, in secret, without your consent, and with your hard-earned money. The goal, as stated, is to create, in the name of democracy, a shadow justice system that will prosecute who they want to be prosecuted and who will clear the way of any co-conspirators. They also want to rewrite the Constitution and to pick the elected leaders in these countries. So let's begin here. Two items that keep popping up in our research. And they keep popping up with the left and Ukraine, and they're used interchangeably. You'll see them in the government documents that we will release here in the next few minutes. The aid packages, and even by the activists that are rioting in the streets all around the world. And they are these terms: civil society and open society. These two phrases are used by this global shadow government to mold the rest of the world into a socialist theme park. And again, being done in your name without your consent or vote. That's a pretty wild charge. Well, let's show you how they do it. They use civil and open society groups
to instigate violent regime change. No, I'm sorry, that's not right. Not violent regime change. What is it that they, because I remember hearing this during the Arab Spring when everybody was out on the streets, and they don't use violent regime change because that's too scary. They call it, oh, yeah, remember, spontaneous indigenous popular uprisings. Now, when we were looking into Ukraine, we were primarily focusing on the timeline after 2014. We knew the coup had brought forward some new possibilities for the Obama administration, and they were primarily what we were focused on. The Bidens got richer. The DNC in the White House for Obama used this new relationship to try to influence the 2016 election. I've laid all of this out in our previous specials with all of the facts and even incriminating audio tape that still today no one in the media seems interested in. There is little to no doubt in my mind that this was indeed what was going on, but still something was bothering me, something was missing. If you watch that first special, I barely even mentioned George Soros and his funding of an NGO in Ukraine because I didn't know enough about it. So I kind of downplayed it because I know how toxic it is to mention George Soros. I know what will be done again to my reputation and what will be said about this program because I dare bring up the name George Soros. But he was funding an NGO, a non-government organization in Ukraine, alongside the Obama administration. Now, according to two former prosecutor generals in Ukraine, that non-governmental organization, the Anti-Corruption Action Center, was being shielded by the U.S. ambassador and by the U.S. State Department. Well, things started to come together and become a little more clear in an interview I did with a former Ukrainian official who was working inside that prosecutor general's office, and he was actually there when people started organizing and protesting in the streets to get his boss fired. I want you to watch this interview. I want to make sure I understand this, because this is something that the American media will never cover, and that is, you say that it was from day one the George Soros organization that wanted him out. Why would they want him out? Why would they want him out?
That was the question we were asking them. We came out to the protesters. I was the one who actually coordinated communication with the protesters on his behalf, on the prosecutor general's behalf, asking, look, guys, what happened? What is the story behind your protest? We're ready to cooperate. Let's go in. We'll show you what's needed. Let's get involved together. You are the NGOs, your non-government organizations. Let's cooperate together and fight corruption. We invited them to the prosecutor's office, and they still, after that, even got worse and protesting all over Facebook, all over physical protests every day by the prosecutor's office, and nobody knew at the time what was they doing, what was their agenda.
If you happen to watch that Saturday podcast of mine, you might remember my reaction. So wait a minute. You didn't know what they were doing? Because that's what he said in the last part. The prosecutor general's office had no clue what the agenda was from this Soros-funded NGO. All they knew was that there was this massive coordination of people on the streets and social media. He specifically cites Facebook, and that they were protesting in the streets. All of this despite the Ukrainian government reaching out to this Soros organization, offering coordination and help, and never a specific charge or accusation as to what they were so mad about. This part of the story sent our research into an entirely new and different direction. And this direction is dark and deep. The Obama administration had been working in tandem with George Soros, supporting his NGOs, going all the way back to the months leading up to the Ukrainian coup in 2014. In 2013, just before the coup, Soros International Renaissance Foundation was their primary financier. But the U.S. Embassy was also strangely giving them tons of money. From 2014 through 2017, basically until Trump became president, the two main sources of funding came from George Soros and the Obama administration, your tax dollars, through USAID. Now look at 2018. The Trump administration halted the money from USAID. But look who stepped in to fill the spot and the extra weight. Soros. He doubled down, and the U.S. Embassy resumed their funding role just as they did back before the 2014 coup. So why is the embassy, and by extension the State Department, working directly and funding George Soros? What do you and I have to gain from this? Well, let me ask you this. Have you noticed where all of the people that have been called to testify against Donald Trump in the impeachment inquiry have come from? All of them are career diplomats. They were all privy to what went down the months leading up to the Ukrainian coup and everything that went down from then up until Donald Trump. And this includes, if the rumors are correct, the whistleblower, whom every single person in Washington believes is Eric Ciaramella. Ciaramella is a CIA analyst, and this is why he is so important to this storyline. He was on the National Security Council during the Trump administration as a Ukrainian expert. He was later kicked out of the White House for leaking information and pushing Russian collusion hoaxes. He also worked directly with the DNC operative, Alexandra Chalupa, who is tasked with working alongside the Ukrainian embassy here in the U.S. to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. And if this isn't enough to discredit him as a witness, he also worked alongside Joe Biden when he was made the point man in Ukraine. But wait, there's more. It became all too painfully obvious why Adam Schiff, 5 days after our first special, said, oh, you know what? We don't need to talk about this guy. In fact, everybody keep his name quiet. Before, everybody needed to know this whistleblower. Let me ask you why all the State Department officials, the CIA, NSC staffers, so scared of Donald Trump poking around in Ukraine. What are they afraid of revealing? I wonder. Does it have anything to do with the financing of some of these groups, like the Soros-funded NGO? I pointed out in my mega chalkboard that the Ukrainian prosecutors claimed to have evidence that over $7 billion had been misappropriated. Is it this part? Is this part of it? Because if this is part of that missing $7 billion, that would kind of be important here, wouldn't it? It would also be relevant if the people currently involved in the impeachment were dealing with these funds that were given to groups like the Soros NGO through our State Department, through the embassy. That would be kind of important. Well, that's an answer I can't officially find, but that is an answer that Donald Trump was asking on that phone call July 25th, and it must be answered in the Senate trial. But I want to show you what we did find. This is an email chain, and it's going to be sent in social media right now. This email chain was released via a Freedom of Information Act request. The first email, starting down here, is from the alleged whistleblower, sent to all the heavyweights within the State Department that were working on Ukraine. The entire email has been redacted. All of it is gone. Whatever Ciaramella specifically said, the State Department will not release that. They do not want you to know. But the final email in the chain reveals the overall context. Obama administration dollars going through the U.S. Embassy via USAID. See, that's what the one guy, Christopher Anderson, said. Embassy Kyiv, coordinated with our U.S. aid mission folks, will have detailed input tomorrow. Why do I know the name Christopher Anderson? I know who Christopher Anderson was. That name sounds familiar because he was the guy testifying against Donald Trump at the impeachment inquiry 2 weeks ago. They're all connected, and the coup is on. But still, it begs the question, what really is going on? It can't be just about Ukraine, can it? And why? Being that U.S. funding to Soros-backed groups began in 2013, we started looking beyond our initial timeline. We noticed one name pop up again and again and again and again, and that's what cracked this for us. His name is Alec Ross. Ross was appointed to the State Department as a senior advisor on innovation to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He first started popping up on our radar screen in Ukraine in late 2011. I'm going to show you some things. This is Ross at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine on a fact-finding mission where he was, quote, learning about the local status of internet freedom and discussing Secretary Clinton's 21st century statecraft agenda. Oh, I'm going to go into Clinton's 21st century agenda more in just a bit. But basically, it boils down to an observation that the Obama administration had regarding the state of the world as it was beginning to undergo these massive, massive changes, technological changes in infrastructure, mass media and communications changes. These changes were all occurring at the same time. This could provide advantages to somebody if they were willing to take advantage. Well, you know what? I'm going to show you some videotape. Let me have Ross describe it. This is Alec Ross addressing the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, October 2011. Watch.
And the force and effect of all three of these paradigm shifts taking place at once creates a moment of remarkably disruptive change. And for those of us that work in foreign policy, the change that I would argue is actually most significant goes to this issue: power.
Wow. Disruptive change. Some might describe this as chaos. But ultimately, for those willing to exploit it, the reward is power. Now, for most of us, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, I thought we all pretty much agree that regime change and stoking chaos is not really what the American people are into. But this is exactly what was going on under the Obama administration, and it is going on tonight. And it's all being done in your name. You cannot be held guiltless after tonight, because now you know. Hillary's State Department was bastardizing a plan that actually began a few weeks after Obama was elected in November 2008. It was an initiative that actually came from the Bush White House called Public Diplomacy 2.0. Its stated goal was to enable people in other countries to combat violent or extreme ideology, more specifically, Islamic radicalism from Al-Qaeda. So the State Department invited a bunch of tech-savvy people from all over the world to show them how to network and how to launch social media campaigns to counter radical ideology. But just a few months later, elections have consequences. Obama was elected, and the new administration under Hillary Clinton changed Public Diplomacy 2.0 to Civil Society 2.0. Remember, that's the leftist catchphrase I told you about? Civil society is often used interchangeably with open society. That's the George Soros thing. The spin is that we're just making these groups that want to rise up and make their countries more free, more open, and more democratic. But what it really means is we just want to turn this country towards leftist politics. And what's entirely ironic that everybody seems to miss is the only way they can make these countries more free and open is by creating systems that give the people in the State Department and George Soros more control, and they do all of it in the cover of secrecy. Again, here's Alec Ross on what Civil Society 2.0 was doing and how they were actively training groups to mobilize through social media. Watch.
A second one is a program that Secretary Clinton launched in Marrakesh, Morocco in November of 2009 called Civil Society 2.0. And what we've done with Secretary Clinton's Civil Society 2.0 program is we've taken one of America's undeniable strengths, the strength of our technology and of our innovators, and we've put them to work in service of our diplomatic goals. So what we've done is we've created these things called tech camps, where over a couple days there's very intensive training of grassroots civil society organizations by American technology experts.
I wonder if any of those groups are conservatives. So let's call a spade here. Civil Society 2.0 was training ground for the foot soldiers of what began to be known as indigenous, which they're not indigenous, they're being trained by us, spontaneous, not spontaneous, we let them loose and tell them here's when you go, and uprisings. Yeah, they are uprisings. And if you're curious as to what civil society or open society groups should be advocating, I can guarantee you it's not the U.S. Constitution. Well, let me have Hillary Clinton herself tell you. Here she is speaking this year on civil society organizations.
Like putting a price on carbon pollution and using the money to fund clean energy and to send dividends back to working families. That would lower emissions and raise incomes at the same time, not to mention weaken petro-dictators like Putin. Or taxing net worth instead of annual income, which would reduce inequality and provide the resources needed to make major new investments in infrastructure, education, and health. We should explore how to make a universal basic income work in a way that preserves dignity and a sense of purpose. And we need to reform corporate governance and break up monopolies and oligopolies.
Okay. Is that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? No, that was Hillary Clinton, right? I thought she was the moderate one. Carbon taxes, a wealth tax, basic income, universal basic income, and breaking up companies and banks. That's something that I thought only the far left of the Democratic Party wanted. The Clintons are the mascots for the establishment. So does that mean that when they say, oh, we got to find somebody mainstream, that it's just finding somebody who will say all those things when they're running, but they actually believe in all of these far left policies? Is that now part of the establishment of the Democratic Party? Yes. And I know this is what, many people have believed. They talk about moving to the center, but they're not moving to the center. They are only moving to the center when they talk to you, a voter. This is them talking to the elites, and their masks are off. But the bigger point here is that when they use words like civil society, open society, and spreading democracy, what they really care about is all of the leftist socialist ideological items that they all have in their speeches, which I want to make very clear. If your position as a politician is socialism, and you're going campaigning on it like Bernie Sanders, and people vote for it, hey, that's cool. But if this is the policy of the State Department, unbeknownst to the people, and it is the State Department's policy, even if the people vote for somebody in the opposite direction like Donald Trump, well, that means we don't really have a republic, that the voter's voice doesn't really matter, that the president is nothing but a showpiece, and it doesn't matter who you elect. This is the policy now of the State Department, because anyone who gets in their way, including the president, they will destroy. That's why this is all a secret. Well, no, it's not actually a secret. It's all out in the open, but they have the press to cover for them. Civil Society 2.0 came to Ukraine in 2011. Alec Ross and his tech camps commenced shortly thereafter, teaching Native activists and NGOs how to mobilize and carry their online presence to the streets. I want to show you a video that was taken inside of the Ukrainian parliament in November 2013. Now, this was before The Ukrainian uprising ousted the former regime. Watch carefully.
Что на территории нашего государства при поддержке и при непосредственном участии посольства Соединенных Штатов Америки осуществляется проект Техком, в рамках которого ведется подготовка к разжиганию гражданской войны на Украине.
Stop this for a second. I don't know about anybody else on the staff, but I don't speak Russian, so did we have this translated for the people? Apparently no. Okay. Let me translate for you roughly. What he's saying there is right now, right down the street, just a few blocks away, the U.S. State Department is training people to start a revolution. That's what he's saying. Now, it's very important to point out that this particular guy was very pro-Russia, and that's why he was being shouted down, because he's very pro-Putin and Russia. But what he's saying is true. It was happening. This is Alec Ross, traveling around the world. That's what he wanted to get started. And make no mistake, they do not want a strong Ukraine able to defend itself, or the Obama administration would have sent the weapons systems that they were begging the Obama administration for to defeat Russia. They say now, oh, that's so important, but it wasn't then. What they want is a state that is beholden to the Democrats' Hydra. So as we started to analyze Ukraine, we started to break down the left's strategy in tearing down an entire country and molding it in line with their political ideology. The founders of the Fabian Society would be very, very impressed. It's a four-part strategy, and since Ukraine was so successful for them, we're going to use it as the case study. But I want you to know that I'm only using Ukraine as an example. This is happening all over the world, and I will show you how close it is to your house a little bit later. First, step one. Step one is the U.S. State Department and their proxies, like the National Endowment for Democracy and Freedom House, we just taught you about a few minutes ago. They identify, train, and fund civil society groups to mobilize. This is civil society 2.0 and operations like Alec Ross and his tech camps. It all began eerily enough on September 11th, 2012. And make no mistake, these programs are designed for one thing only: revolution. They operate to nurture chaos and collapse the regime. They are not even trying to hide that fact. Check out this quote from Alec Ross. Quote, "Some of the things that I spoke about when I came into the department, things like leaderless revolutions or virtual organizations, they might have been really edgy or a little off-center. But after Tunisia and Egypt, nobody is questioning the abstraction of leaderless revolutions. And after WikiLeaks, certainly everyone understands the power of virtual, globally distributed organizations." Now, if leaderless revolutions and leaderless organizations sound familiar, let me remind you, it's because that's what they say about Antifa. You can't go after Antifa. And you can't even say what Antifa is really for or against, because they're a leaderless activist group. We can't shut down Occupy Wall Street because there is no leadership. No administration in their right mind that believed in the principles of this governing document called our Constitution, outside of Obama, Hillary, FDR, and Wilson, would ever condone anything like this. That's the work of a madman to destabilize the Western world. But that's why they built it to run separately within an already established organization like the State Department. Now, I'm not telling you that everyone in the State Department is bad. I am telling you there are people that will guard this with their life. These policies are being pursued right now as we speak, and they could give a flying crap who the president is. Again, the quote from Alec Ross, quote, "Instead of trying to create a new bureau, What we wanted to do was build a long-term institutional capacity. I leave feeling that the work has been fully institutionalized and the programs will live on. What was it the whistleblower's lawyer said? Don't worry, if one falls, two will rise to take its place. That's weird because that's kind of like Hydra. Don't worry, if you cut the head off of one, two heads will rise in its place. By the way, a little tip who Alec and Hillary and the State Department and George Soros from Captain America here. You're on the wrong side, guys. Maybe you should stop talking and acting like Hydra. Of course, Hydra, they were socialists because the Nazis were socialists. It's starting to become clear now, a little bit perhaps, why the U.S. ambassador in Ukraine was telling Ukrainian lawmakers to keep their hands off of Soros NGOs. One of the star witnesses for Adam Schiff in the impeachment is the former Ukrainian ambassador. It said that Trump and the new president of Ukraine spoke about this stuff in the July 25th phone call. They both said that they knew that the ambassador in Ukraine was in with dirty people with our State Department and Ukraine. Multiple sources verify that she told the prosecutor general in Ukraine to keep their hands off of the Soros NGO and various others with the State Department. Is it now a little more clear why she would have said that? Because Soros is working with the State Department. It's not criminal to them, it's the plan. It's also clear why a CIA analyst was involved in the U.S. aid money going to Ukraine. And now is a whistleblower against the president who is looking into that? Or maybe why the main witness in the impeachment are all from the State Department and diplomatic corps. And also how the intelligence community and FBI has seemingly been operating on their own to bring down Trump. It's because, as Alec Ross said, this operation has now been, quote, institutionalized and will live on. Now, let's move to step two. The step two is when the opportunity emerges, the U.S.-trained activists go into action. Now, I'll talk about the Arab Spring here in a bit, but the opportunity in the Middle East and North Africa was the Tunisian fruit vendor setting himself on fire. For Ukraine, it was when the former president decided to side with Russia over the European Union. That's when all the people that Alec Ross and the State Department had trained went into action on their cue. Because step three is the State Department and their proxies actively support the opposition. Well, this is going to make you laugh. It's so obvious. Under Obama, this was the actual administration policy. But now this happens regardless of the elected administration's policy by the institutionalized deep state. This institutionalized policy is what all the witnesses are talking about in the impeachment trial. Trump is a threat to the institutionalized policy that they have going. And they will not stop doing this policy no matter what president says, no matter who the president is, unless this is revealed and the American people say, enough. Now, as activists and protesters and riots began to overtake the streets in Ukraine, here's Victoria Nuland. She's the Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasian Affairs. She traveled to the Ukraine 3 separate times during that uprising. In December 2013, she was even shown here handing out cookies to the revolutionary activist in the streets. The problem is sometimes the revolutionaries are good, sometimes the revolutionary is bad. It doesn't matter to this organization. That same month, I want to remind you, John McCain showed the Obama's regime change policy was a bipartisan effort when he went to Ukraine to meet with the Ukrainian opposition. But let's not forget, this is the same John McCain that went over to Syria to meet with the terrorists who later became ISIS, when the administration used this very system to try to overthrow Assad. You want to know why we're there? This is why. The National Endowment for Democracy reported that it spent over $3 million of your tax money in Ukraine for this. In fact, here's the document. We'll be releasing it now on the internet. The question is, this report has been scrubbed from their official website. Why? Why was it scrubbed? And when will the people learn that the internet is forever? Their funding included more than $30,000 to George Soros' Open Society Foundation. Again, it begs the question, why is the U.S. government helping George Soros? What is their ultimate goal here? The answer to those questions lie in the final stage of this plan, which is step 4. Once regime change has occurred, infiltrate the new government with hand-picked civil society leaders. Now, the Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, the one that was handing out the cookies, she was caught red-handed in a leaked phone conversation that we have, discussing how the government needed to manipulate who would become the next Ukrainian prime minister. And surprise, surprise, that man ended up getting the job. But even though they'd been publicly outed manipulating the affairs of a sovereign nation, they didn't stop. They doubled down. We already know that the State Department and the Obama administration as a whole were working to protect a George Soros-funded NGO called the Anti-Corruption Action Center. Soros and the Obama administration were specifically using them to target Ukraine's criminal justice system. Remember, the idea is to have a shadow justice system that could go after the guys who are standing in your way, good or bad, and to protect the people who are on your side. But the coordination didn't stop there. Newly released emails obtained by Freedom of Information Act request shows near weekly communication between Nuland and Soros. This is an email chain from June 1st, 2016, and it shows Soros setting up a call with Nuland for one of their scheduled updates. The next email chain, just a week later, initiated by Soros' organization, details how the State Department and Soros were actively working together on projects relating to Ukraine's criminal justice system. And I want you to look at this and see if you recognize any of the oh, there's the name of the whistleblower. Isn't that crazy? It's like this guy had his hands into everything. The State Department, the NSC, the CIA, the DNC, all these operatives, Joe Biden, and now George Soros. This is the reason why Adam Schiff and the Democrats are scared of naming the whistleblower, because his fingers are on everything here. There's no way this man can testify in an open forum. I just hope he's not feeling sad or suicidal. The president should put an order out to protect this man from those people in this deep state. They have to make sure that this man never testifies. Now, we're sending this document out right now, and this document is insane. This shows you how bold they are. This is the final piece that shows you the full extent of how embedded the State Department and George Soros were together in Ukraine. This is the one that sealed the deal on the theft of an entire country. This is a leaked document that was actually written by George Soros personally. It's signed by him in the end. He actually says, a self-appointed advocate of the new Ukraine. This is his comprehensive strategy for the new Ukraine. In this paper, Soros identifies the institution that need to either be set up or targeted by his group and the U.S. State Department. The first one is the National Anti-Corruption Bureau that needed to be established. Well, they got this one done right away. They got that done in the beginning. It's also relevant to point out that this relationship bore fruit for the Obama administration as they pressured the Bureau to investigate Manafort. They later hit a home run when they illegally released information implicating Manafort in the Black Ledger. Doesn't mean Manafort isn't guilty of something. It just means illegally released that information, which kicked the Russian investigation into overdrive. Now, why did I say illegally release the information? Because a Ukrainian court convicted the head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, you know, the first thing that Soros said they had to do. They convicted the head of that group for doing it and interfering in the U.S. 2016 election. It's interesting that the establishment of the Bureau was part of Soros's plan, and they were directly coordinating with the Obama administration. And it's the head of this organization that is caught on tape bragging about how he worked to discredit Trump on behalf of Hillary Clinton. If you missed that tape, you'll find that in episode 1 of this series. By the way, convicted in a court of law for interfering in the U.S. election, but our media has absolutely no interest. Now, 2. He talks about judicial reform, including the appointment of new High Council of Justice. You got to get rid of all of these people that won't play ball. Then 3, rewrite the Constitution. That's game, set, and match. Control those 3 areas along with an ally in the presidency, and the country was theirs. But Soros had a problem. As he notes in this document that you will have, the newly elected parliament, they call it the Rada, was slowing down his master plan by having the audacity of insisting, get this, on a pesky little thing called transparency. But not to worry, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Soros notes that after a year of preparation, all the pieces were finally in place. I don't want to read this exact. Were finally in place for radical reform. The framework bringing the various branches of government together has also emerged. The National Reform Council brings the presidential administration, cabinet of ministers, and the Rada and its committees to civil society. Wow. He did it, which is basically all of the government, all of it, now would be linked directly to George Soros and the U.S. State Department. We control it. That doesn't sound like a democracy. It doesn't sound like a free country. I feel bad for the people in Ukraine. We're monsters. Oh, but don't worry, Ukraine, remember, is only the example, the one that is brought up in the impeachment. Oh, there's more. This shows the insane hypocrisy of Soros and our State Department and anybody else involved in this to claim to be spreading democracy. The National Security Committee has the power to completely bypass their parliament, designed to fast-track radical reform by completely subverting the will of the people. That doesn't sound like democracy. Now, here's the best part. You want to know who really pulls the string and what now has become the most powerful entity in the new Ukraine? All you have to do is look to paragraph 5 on page 4. You're going to love this one. The sole financier for the National Reform Council was the International Renaissance Foundation, also known as the Ukrainian branch of the George Soros Foundation. Well, but never mind. It's okay, because Soros points out that the Ukrainian department would later take over the funding for the Reform Council. So there's that. But the Project Management Office would eventually fill Soros's funding role, and that would lead the change on implementing reform projects. But where are they going to get their funding? George Soros. So he's standing by also in this document with $1 billion of his own money to invest in various Ukrainian businesses. Because why settle with bending a country to your leftist policy and your will when you can also bilk billions to boot? Oh, but he makes it clear in this document that he's not going to take this money. He's going to reinvest all of his profit into his civil society programs. Obama was right. Sometimes you have enough money. Soros doesn't want any more money. If I can quote Alec Ross, he wants more power. It is hard to grasp the concept that someone could start revolutions, collapse countries, inflict pain beyond our imagination, be considered a criminal in many countries in Asia for what he's done. But this is what he's about. I want to remind you of the words that he said that we showed you on my special from Fox, The Puppet Master. Listen to him in his own words.
When you try to, let's say, improve society, you affect different people and different interests differently, and they are not actually commensurate. So you very often have all kinds of unintended adverse consequences. So I had to experiment, and it was a learning process. The first part was this subversive activity, disrupting repressive regimes. That was a lot of fun, and that's actually what got me hooked on this whole enterprise.
It's a lot of fun. Ukraine became the crown jewel for the new institutionalized deep state and their like-minded partners such as George Soros. And we might not have truly ever known the full extent of how bad it became if it wasn't for that July 25th phone call between Trump and Zelensky, because Hydra mobilized and they revealed themselves. You know, I heard a lot of people say, I just think I want a politician that will burn the whole thing down. Well, you got that in Donald Trump. He's a hand grenade. But this hand grenade went off and exposed the system. It's up to you, because Ukraine is just the tip of the iceberg. When Clinton's Civil Society 2.0 first came to Ukraine, consider the state of the world at the time. I want to go back to the speech Alec Ross was giving in Ukraine in 2011. Here he is discussing the redistribution of power in certain parts of the world. Watch.
I think the best example of how it's redistributing power is if you think about the revolutions in the Arab world. A lot of people call these revolutions Facebook revolutions or Twitter revolutions. I actually disagree very strongly with people calling them Facebook revolutions or Twitter revolutions.
Mm-hmm. The revolutions going on in the Middle East that he's talking about were more commonly known as the Arab Spring. At this point in time, November 2011, revolutions had broken out in Tunisia, Oman, Yemen, Egypt, Syria, Libya, and Morocco. Two regimes, Egypt and Libya, had already fully collapsed. Now for the parts of the Arab Spring. The Obama administration was much more overt in their participation. Do you remember this from Hillary Clinton?
That is the land of unconfirmed requests.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, oh, I'm sure it did.
Every time I hear that, I think, Gaddafi was a monster. But I think of that video here of Gaddafi, barely alive, being dragged through the streets by the mobs and beaten to death. We came, we saw, he died. Can you imagine being responsible for that and laughing about it? It's almost as if, well, the subversive stuff is kind of fun. Clinton, the State Department, who do they answer to? They don't answer to me. They don't answer to you. They don't even answer to the president. Libya still hasn't recovered and would eventually become the country with the largest ISIS presence outside of Syria. Syria, Libya, dumpster fires right now. Don't forget, that was also about Benghazi. What was the State Department doing in Benghazi? They were shipping guns to Syria. This is all part of it. Alec Ross, the Alec Ross shop within the State Department, were at ground zero right from the beginning. They were training NGOs and rebels in both countries and providing communications technologies to enable them to coordinate. This was going down while the Arab Spring was in full swing before the meddling began. Oh no, that began long before. Civil Society 2.0 began in November 2009, and it is no coincidence where they chose to kick it off, North Africa. Remember what this program is intended for, what it's designed to nurture: revolution and regime change, as they did in Ukraine. They identify civil society groups, they train them, they fund them, they show them how to mobilize. Just a few months later, the White House initiated secret meetings with officials from the State Department and the CIA. The meetings were led by Dennis Ross, the senior advisor on the Middle East, Samantha Power from the National Security Council, and Gail Smith, the director of global development. Well, they developed something. It was an 18-page classified report, which the Obama administration dubbed Presidential Study Directive 11. Now, the Obama administration issued 11 study directives in total, the vast majority of which have all been declassified. But all we know about Presidential Study Directive 11 is that it had to do with, quote, political reform in the Middle East and North Africa. An official with knowledge of the classified report said this to the New York Times, quote, whether it was Yemen or other countries in the regions, you saw a set of trends, a big youth population, threadbare education system, stagnant economies, and new social network technologies like Facebook and Twitter. That was a real prescription for trouble, or an opportunity for somebody who liked power. Could I just ask, is this why Facebook and Twitter and Google have hired so many Democrats, high-ranking Democrats, people who specifically, many of them came from the Clinton administration, Hillary Clinton's State Department administration? Are they just an extension of the State Department? By the way, these are questions. This is not anything I can prove. I would just like to know. Because did you know that the original seed money for Google came from the CIA? What are you getting in return for that investment? By the way, these are all questions, not a theory, not a conspiracy fact yet. But why is this report still classified? Again, a question. I can't prove this because only the president can have this released. But is there an office in the State Department that was traveling the world training these big youth populations at the time in revolution and regime change in the months before the Arab Spring began? Because we know it's doing it now. Is this the birth of it? Civil Society 2.0 arrived in the Middle East and North Africa in November 2009. Presidential Study Directive 11 occurred in August 2010. The Arab Spring kicked off 4 months later. I want to make a personal plea to President Trump. If you want to know how institutionalized Hydra really is and why they will not allow you to continue, you might want to declassify Directive number 11. If you want to see how deep the Ukrainian rabbit hole really goes, declassify Presidential Study Directive 11. You are the only person, sir, that has the power to do it. I have a feeling that the strategy they used to take over Ukraine and other places might be described in this presidential directive. Everything that was happening in Ukraine was being done during the Arab Spring. Civil Society 2.0 had been on the ground a full year before the Arab Spring kicked off. And what did they call that again? They said it was a spontaneous revolution. U.S. dollars then began to flow to the protesters on the street. They did this through funding from the Freedom House and National Endowment for Democracy. What a coincidence. Remember, the State Department had that meeting in 2008, a few months after Obama was elected. Yeah, you know who's there? The Egyptian activists that brought down their countries. Yeah, they were at that conference. They were, quote, taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. This is a leaked State Department diplomatic cable where they confirmed the participation of the Egyptian activists in the 2008 meeting in New York. It's now going out online. It also reveals that the U.S. Embassy in Egypt was putting pressure on the Egyptian government in support of the street protesters. And just as in Ukraine, the Egyptian regime buckled under the new weight of these new tech-savvy global community organizers. All three stages that would later be used in Ukraine were pulled off to perfection in toppling the regime in Egypt. But then it fell apart. What about stage 4? Infiltrating the criminal justice system. It was a little harder in Egypt because the military had an iron grasp on the government. So how did they plan on getting around that? Well, exactly what George Soros proposes in his documents. You just rewrite the Constitution. Let me show you this. It's a Reuters article written right after the regime fell. It describes who was involved in rewriting Egypt's constitution. Look who's in charge. Quote, civil society groups had already produced several drafts, and a new constitution could be ready in a month. The main group in charge was the Arabic Network for Human Rights. Come on. Come on, guess who funds them? Soros. And while Soros funded all the NGOs that went to work rewriting the Constitution, he then moved to get his guys into top-level positions within the government. Remember, that's part of the last step. Mohammed el-Baradi, he emerged out of nowhere as the de facto leader of the revolution. He was also a trustee of the organization called the International Crisis Group. They're a think tank that claims to be, quote, working to prevent wars and shape policies that would build a more peaceful world, or, if I may paraphrase, a civil society. They're also founded and funded George Soros. Everything was in place for a Ukraine-level theft of a country, but the Egyptian military stepped in and stopped it. What began 10 years ago in North Africa and the Middle East, and then later perfected in Ukraine in 2014, is still going on as we speak. We may have a new president, a new administration. There's a new sheriff in town. But Hydra doesn't care. But to be fair, let's just say, because at this point you could say, you know what, they're trying to foment revolution only in bad countries. Oh, but I wish that were the case. A few months after Civil Society 2.0 began in Ukraine, a near identical project popped up in Macedonia. In February 2012, the U.S. government gave George Soros nearly $5 million to carry out a, quote, civil society program. According to the financial disclosure, Soros was involved in training and funding Macedonians on freedom of association, on youth policies, on citizen initiatives, pervasive arguments, and the use of new media. So in other words, what they were going for here was the Macedonian Spring. The money flowed through the State Department and was facilitated by the U.S. ambassador to Macedonia, Jess Billy. Wow, that's weird, because that's what we're claiming happened in Ukraine. We have the documents to show that. And here is another ambassador who works for the State Department doing the same thing. Now, at this point, it's not surprising coming from the Obama administration, but after Trump was elected in 2016, an additional $9.5 million was allocated to keep that operation going. Judicial Watch has done some digging on this, and they've interviewed several Macedonian officials to find out what the hell is our State Department and Soros up to. See if it sounds familiar. May I quote, the groups organize youth movements, create influential media outlets, and organize violent protests to undermine the institutions and policies implemented by the government. One of the Soros groups funded the translation and publication of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals into Macedonian. Who in their right mind would do this? What did Hydra have against the Macedonian government at the time? Well, one theory is that they are one of the more conservative governments in all of Europe. They had the lowest flat tax on the continent. They had close ties with Israel. They were strongly pro-life. They also had recently built a border fence to try to deal with their immigration crisis. The State Department was attacking this government and going through George Soros with your money. It was so bad that it prompted Mike Lee to write an official letter to the ambassador asking, what the heck are you doing? This wasn't the official policy of the government. No, this is the institutionalized policy of the shadow government. And as it happened, time and time again since all of this began, Violence, riots, chaos were the consequences of that shadow policy. By the way, I talked to Mike Lee about this. The U.S. ambassador remained in Macedonia until a few months ago. There was never any explanation as to why he left. There was no entry on the official embassy website. He just suddenly wasn't there anymore. When I talked to Mike Lee before this broadcast, he told me that he had received what the State Department might classify as answers, but Mike said his questions were never answered to satisfactory conditions. Spontaneous, indigenous, popular uprisings. Check the newspaper today, if any newspaper is still in print. They're breaking out. And the fingerprints of civil society 2.0 and George Soros is all over them. They're following their 4-point plan country by country. I challenge you, everywhere violence is erupting, try to find one that isn't related to these programs, the groups, the people that I've shown you tonight. Let me give you one. The violence in Chile, it continues to boil over. Chile is one country in South America that actually has seen economic growth by adhering to open and free markets. It's now spiraling out of control. More than 15 people have died in this revolution. And you know what sparked the chaos? It wasn't somebody setting themselves on fire, no. Civil society groups hit the streets in Chile due to a 3-cent cost in public transportation. An increase of 3 pennies? Really? Chile's free market government has been a target of Hydra for a very long time. But Civil Society 2.0 began setting up their TAC camps in Chile November 2010. From the press release, quote, goals of the program include increasing regional civil society organizations, digital literacy, sharing information, building networks, and matchmaking like-minded individuals to organizations. Is anyone doing this that's actually pro-freedom? We are way behind, guys. It always reads the same, and regime change and chaos in the street always follow. And those like-minded organizations and individuals included people like this woman. Her name is Javiera Lopez. She's one of the lead organizers out in the streets. She's also the national political counselor for a far-left social political party, socialist, called Democratic Revolution. Their top demands, as seen in this tweet, is to force the rewriting of the Constitution. Gee, where have we heard that before? The State Department, Soros, Hydra, that is called Civil Society 2.0. A year after Civil Society 2.0 began training activists in Chile, Democratic Revolution formed to organize the, quote, activities of the student movement. Today, they're leading the charge in the same way Egyptian activists overthrew the Mubarak regime. But none of it would have been possible without the financing of George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. And your money. Billions of dollars of your money. Soros was there from the beginning and continued funding through at least 2015. Now they're poised to overthrow one of the freest market economies in South America. And they're taking down country after country after country, one at a time. The strategies of progressive leaders in the past of establishing large governing bodies such as the League of Nations or the UN or bending continents under their ideological boots is largely over. Why start from the top when you can conquer fragile regimes one by one? And if you happen to think this really doesn't affect you because it's only happening beyond our borders, I've got some really bad news for you. Countries like Ukraine, Macedonia, Egypt, Yemen, and Chile are much easier to heat up, destabilize, and then cast in your image that you want. You can place allies in the criminal justice system. You can do deals with their leaders to fast-track legislation. You can't really do that here. Or can you? Is it a coincidence that leftists are being trained here in the U.S. by Soros groups? Is it a coincidence that our DOJ, FBI, CIA All of this has been so badly damaged in reputation, and corruption is at such high levels. I've never seen this before in my country. And our Constitution is constantly discredited and undermined, and no one really even is taught it anymore. How far-fetched is it to believe that in the next 5 years you could get America to call for an anti-corruption bureau because it has to stop? Some outside force that would come in and rat out corruption. How hard is it believed that protesters and leaderless organizations could rise up to create instability and demand a few changes be made to our Constitution? It's been a long night. You have a lot to think about, and you have a lot of homework to do. But I beg you to do it. This has to be exposed because, make no mistake, it is happening here in the United States. They are skipping for now the federal government and going state by state, county by county, city by city. The same tactics they've been employing all over the world have come and are coming to Main Street, USA. We are currently in touch with several state agencies in multiple states that over the summer tipped me to something that they were looking into, and it is civil society 2.0. It is well organized and well financed, and it's way beyond anything you might have ever heard before. It is horrific. I didn't understand what it all meant until the impeachment and until we started putting this together. Now I understand. You will not be able to keep this republic if you are not well informed and if you put your personal desires aside. If you like Trump, you don't like Trump, it doesn't matter. If you want to hold on to that republic that our founders gave us, you must do your own homework. And I urge you, there is so much misinformation and disinformation and out-and-out lies. Please look for actual documents where you know the source of where that came from. Share all of this with your friends. After the holidays, assuming the investigation at the states are finished, we're going to do our next special on Hydra in your neighborhood and what is happening here. And we will only bring it to you when I can share the official documents with us. That special, hopefully, will air in January. I would ask that we use Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's to do some soul searching and ask ourselves, are we humble enough to get down on our knees and not only thank God for all of the blessings that we have, but to beg Him for protection? Are we willing to renew the American covenant? Because I tell you tonight, unless America does its homework calmly, rationally, does not add to the chaos, and unless God's not on our side, He never was, unless we are on His side, the republic will perish. What do you say? Not on our watch. From Dallas, good night.